The town voted to run the Irish doctor out by sundown. She voted to let him stay forever. The vote happened at the town meeting in the Grange Hall on a Thursday evening in September. The hall full of men who farmed wheat, and men who ran stores, and men who shod horses, and men who did not do much of anything, except attend town meetings and vote on things. And the thing they were voting on was whether to let the Irish doctor remain in Prescott, Kansas, or whether to run him out by sundown, and the running out was winning, because the running out had more voices behind it, louder voices. Voices that belonged to men who believed that an Irish Catholic had no business practicing medicine in a Protestant town, and that the Irishness was the problem, and the Catholicness was the problem, and the combination of the two was a problem so large that it could only be solved by removal, and removal meant the road, and the road meant gone. The Irish doctor's name was Niall Kavanaugh. He was 31 years old. He had come to Prescott 3 months earlier, because Prescott had no doctor, and no doctor meant that the sick stayed sick, and the injured stayed injured, and the dying died faster than they needed to, and the faster dying was the thing Niall Kavanaugh could not tolerate, because tolerating preventable death was not something his training allowed. His training being 4 years at the Royal College of Surgeons in Dublin, and 2 years of practice in Boston, and 6 months on a steamship tending to immigrants who arrived in America with nothing except fevers and hope. And the fevers Niall could treat, and the hope he could not. But the treating was enough. He had set up his practice in a rented room above the hardware store. The room was small, and clean and adequate. And the adequate was all Niall required, because medicine does not need grandeur. Medicine needs a table and light and instruments and knowledge. And Niall had all four. And the having was the qualification. And the qualification was sufficient for the practice of healing, which is what he did. The first week had been quiet. People came reluctantly, the way animals approach an unfamiliar water source, sideways, with one eye on the exit. They came because they were in pain, and pain overrides suspicion, the way thirst overrides caution. And the overriding was the opening through which Niall entered their lives, with clean hands and steady instruments, and the particular calm of a man who has seen worse things than a broken arm or an infected tooth. He had seen cholera on a steamship, had seen a woman deliver a baby in steerage during a storm, had seen the kind of suffering that makes a Kansas wheat town's ailments look like inconveniences, and the having seen was the steadiness, and the steadiness was what his patients felt, the certainty that this man knows what he is doing, and from that steadiness, trust had begun to build. He healed Amos Ridley's broken arm. He healed the Pfeiffer boy's infected tooth. He delivered Clara Baskin's baby when the baby came 3 weeks early, and the coming early was a danger, and the danger required competence, and Niall had competence in abundance. The abundance of a man trained to act when acting is the difference between life and death, and the baby lived and Clara lived, and the living was the evidence of Niall's skill, and the evidence should have been sufficient to settle the question of whether the Irish doctor belonged in Prescott, Kansas. But evidence is not always sufficient. Evidence is not sufficient when the question is not about skill, but about origin. And origin was the question. Where did this man come from? And the coming from was Ireland. And Ireland was Catholic. And Catholic was foreign. And foreign was dangerous. And dangerous was the conclusion. And the conclusion was the vote. And the vote was happening now, in the Grange Hall on a Thursday evening in September. Bess Laurier was not at the vote. Women did not vote at town meetings in Prescott. The not voting was the custom, and the custom was enforced not by law, but by expectation. And expectation is a more powerful enforcer than law, because law can be challenged, and expectation cannot. Expectation being the invisible fence that keeps people in their designated pastures. Bess was at home. Home was a frame house on Elm Street that she shared with her mother, Vivian, who was 63 years old, and who had rheumatism in both hands, and a cough that had lasted since February. And the lasting was the worry, because a cough that lasts 7 months is not a cough. It is a condition, and the condition required a doctor. And the doctor was Niall Kavanaugh, who had examined Vivian twice, and who had prescribed a tincture that eased the cough, and a salve that eased the hands. And the easing was the relief. The first relief Vivian had felt in months, and the relief was the thing Bess was grateful for, and the gratitude was the reason Bess could not accept the vote. She learned about the vote from her neighbor, Mrs. Paulding, who came to the back door at 7 o'clock and said, "They are voting to run the Irish doctor out by sundown tomorrow. Emmett says it is practically decided." Mrs. Paulding said it the way people deliver bad news, quickly, with the speed of someone who wants to put the words down and walk away from them, the way a person puts down something heavy and steps back. Bess did not step back. Bess stepped forward. The stepping forward was the decision, and the decision was instant. The way all important decisions are instant. They arrive fully formed, without deliberation, because deliberation is the process of talking yourself out of what you already know. And Bess already knew what she knew, which was that the town was wrong, and the wrong needed to be corrected, and the correcting was her responsibility, because responsibility belongs to the person who sees the wrong, not to the person the wrong is done to. She put on her coat. She kissed her mother's forehead. She walked to the Grange hall, the walking taking 7 minutes. The 7 minutes of preparation. The preparation not of arguments. She had no arguments. She had only the truth. And the truth was simpler than arguments, and more powerful than arguments, because arguments can be countered, and truth can only be denied, and denial is not the same as refutation. She opened the door of the Grange hall and walked in. The walking in was the violation of the custom that said women do not attend town meetings, and the violation was noticed. Every head turned, every voice stopped. She saw the room, 30 or 40 men in work clothes and church clothes and no particular clothes, seated on benches and standing along the walls, the room smelling of tobacco and boot leather, and the particular staleness of a space where opinions have been circulating without ventilation. She saw Emmett Paulding at the front, standing behind a table, as though the table were a pulpit, and the pulpit gave him authority, and she saw Harlan Briggs and Deacon Morris, and the other men who had made the Irish doctor's removal their cause, and the cause was visible in their faces, the righteous certainty of men who have decided that exclusion is a virtue, and who have dressed their prejudice in the language of community welfare. The stopping was a silence that was not respectful, but startled, the startle of people who see something that is not supposed to be there, the way you startle when you see a deer in a barn or a hawk on a fence post. "This meeting is for men, Bess," said Emmett Paulding, who was leading the meeting because Emmett led everything. Emmett was the kind of man who believed that leadership was his natural state, the way a rooster believes that crowing is his natural state, and the crowing was loud, and the loudness was mistaken for authority. "This meeting is about a doctor," Bess said. "The doctor treats women. The doctor treats women. The doctor treats women in this town who is sick, including my mother, whose cough he eased when no one else could ease it. And the easing is the reason I am here. I am here because the man you are voting to remove is the man who is keeping my mother alive, and keeping my mother alive is not a thing I will allow you to vote on." The silence held. The holding was the power. Bess had the silence. And having the silence in a room full of men is having the room. And having the room is the thing that matters when you are one woman standing against a vote. "He is Irish," said Harlan Briggs, who ran the feed store, and who said things like he is Irish the way a person says it is raining, as a fact that requires no elaboration, the fact being its own argument. "He is a doctor," Bess said. "He is a doctor who set Amos Ridley's arm, and delivered Clara Baskin's baby, and pulled the Pfeiffer boy's tooth, and treated my mother's cough. He is a doctor. The doctorness is the thing that matters. The Irishness is not a thing that matters when you are sick. When you are sick, the only thing that matters is that the person treating you knows what they are doing, and Niall Kavanaugh knows what he is doing." "He is Catholic," said Deacon Morris, who said Catholic the way Harlan Briggs said Irish, as a self-evident disqualification. The way rain is a self-evident reason to stay indoors. "My mother is alive," Bess said. "My mother is alive because of that Catholic Irishman. If you vote to run him out, you are voting to let my mother die, because there is no other doctor within 40 miles, and 40 miles is too far for a woman with rheumatism and a cough that has lasted 7 months to travel, and the too far is the death, and the death is the thing you are voting for. And I want every man in this room to know that when you raise your hand to run the doctor out, you are raising your hand to kill my mother." The silence changed. The silence went from startled to uncomfortable. And uncomfortable is the silence that precedes reconsideration. Because reconsideration is what happens when people are forced to connect their abstract decisions to concrete consequences. And the concrete consequence was Vivian Laurier's life. And Vivian Laurier was a woman they all knew. A woman who had made pies for the church social and quilts for the winter drive, and who was someone's mother and someone's neighbor and someone's friend, and the someoneness was the weight that tipped the scale. Emmett Paulding cleared his throat. The clearing was the retreat of a man who had been crowing and who had been silenced by a hen. And the silencing was permanent, because the permanent is what happens when truth meets bluster. Truth wins, not because truth is louder, but because truth is heavier, and heavier things do not move when pushed. "Perhaps we should table this matter," Emmett said. "You should not table it," Bess said. "You should settle it. You should settle it tonight. You should vote to let the doctor stay, and the staying should be permanent. And the permanent should mean that no one in this town ever votes on whether a man can practice the profession he was trained for, based on where he was born or how he prays. The where and the how are not qualifications. The skill is the qualification. The saving of lives is the qualification. The easing of pain is the qualification. Niall Kavanaugh has all three. The vote was taken. The vote was to let the doctor stay. The staying was unanimous, because unanimity is what happens when shame arrives in a room, and shame had arrived with Bess Laurier. Shame carried in the form of a simple truth, that running a doctor out of town because he is Irish and Catholic is the act of men who have confused prejudice with principle. And the confusion had been corrected by a woman in a coat who had walked 7 minutes to save a man she barely knew, because saving people who are being wronged is the thing Bess Laurier did, the way Niall Kavanaugh healed people. Instinctively, inevitably, without calculation. After the vote, Bess walked to the room above the hardware store. She climbed the stairs. She knocked on the door. Niall opened it, and the opening was the beginning, though neither of them knew it yet. "The vote went your way," Bess said. "You are staying." "I heard there was a vote." "I did not know the outcome." "The outcome is that you are staying. The outcome is that I stood in the Grange hall and told them that you are the reason my mother is alive, and that running you out would be the same as letting her die, and the telling was the argument, and the argument was sufficient." Niall looked at Bess. He looked at her the way a man looks at a person who has done something extraordinary for him without being asked. The look that contains gratitude and surprise, and the particular recognition that arrives when you realize that someone has fought for you. And the fighting for is the most intimate act a person can perform, because it requires risk. And risk taken for another person is the definition of love, though neither of them used that word yet, because the word was too large for the doorway, and the doorway was where they were standing. "Why?" Niall said. "Because you are a good doctor, and this town needs a good doctor, and the needing is the reason, and the reason is sufficient. That is the reason you gave them. I am asking for the reason you did not give them." Bess paused. The pause was the honesty that comes before the truth that is harder to say than the truth you say in public, because the truth you say in public is the truth about the world, and the truth you say in private is the truth about yourself. "The reason I did not give them is that I could not bear the thought of you leaving. The not bearing is the reason. The not bearing is the thing I discovered when Mrs. Paulding told me about the vote. I discovered that the thought of you gone from this town was a thought I could not hold. The way you cannot hold a hot coal. You drop it, and the dropping was the walking, and the walking was the 7 minutes to the Grange hall, and the 7 minutes was the distance between the thought and the action was the saving." Niall smiled. The smile was the answer to the truth, the answer that does not require words, because the answer is the smile itself. And the smile said everything the words had not said, which was, "I am glad you came. I am glad you fought. I am glad the vote went my way. I am glad I am staying. I am glad you are standing in this doorway. I am glad." The next morning, Niall came to the house on Elm Street to check on Vivian. He came with his medical bag and a jar of honey from a patient who had paid him in honey because cash was scarce and honey was not. And the honey was the payment, and the payment was the sweetness, and sweetness was the thing that Niall Kavanaugh brought wherever he went. Not the honey, but the manner. The gentle manner of a man who had learned that healing begins before the medicine, begins with the arrival, with the knocking on the door, with the way you say good morning to the person you have come to help. Bess opened the door. She had not slept well, the not sleeping the result of the evening that had contained a town meeting, and a doorway, and a truth she had not planned to speak, but had spoken, because the truth does not wait for plans. The truth arrives when it arrives, and the arriving is the speaking. "Good morning," Niall said. "I have come to see your mother, and I have brought honey. The honey is unnecessary. The honey is for the cough. A spoonful in warm water, twice a day. It eases the throat. It is not medicine, it is kindness, and kindness is sometimes more effective than medicine, and I prescribe both." Bess took the honey. The taking was the acceptance, and the acceptance was the beginning of the daily visits. The visits that were for Vivian, but that became also for Bess, and the also for was the courtship. The courtship conducted in a parlor with a sick woman, sleeping in the next room, and a doctor sitting across from a woman who had saved him, and the sitting across was the love. Quiet and steady and Irish and Protestant and none of that mattering, because the mattering was the two of them in a parlor in Prescott, Kansas, discovering that the reason she could not bear the thought of him leaving was the same reason he could not stop coming back. The reason that has no nationality and no denomination. The reason that is simply and completely itself.